This is the Business Stuff Podcast. This is where I will share the lessons I've learned from advising thousands of businesses over almost 30 years. Each episode will give you practical insight to allow you to learn from other people's mistakes. I'll be pulling in experts from our team and the world of business, and together we'll make sure your business is giving you what you want. My name is Martin, and this is the Business Stuff Podcast. So I'm here with Sarah Furness from Hay Kilner to talk about employment law, recruitment, retention, a whole host of things. Sarah, give us 2 seconds on who you are and what's going on in recruitment at the moment.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Furness. I'm a partner in the employment team at Hay Kilner. In terms of what's going on with recruitment, all of my clients are telling me that they're basically having a really difficult time recruiting at the moment.
What's causing that? Is that because they're not offering the jobs that people want, or people have changed too much what they want? Like where is it?
There's a combination. I think that unemployment's at historically low levels, so the candidates just aren't out there. I think post-COVID, people have changed what they want. Lots of lifestyle changes. Brexit is now having an impact in respect of people not being able to get work visas.
So the labour supply, the pool of workers is different.
Exactly. And if employers now want to sponsor overseas workers, it's quite onerous and difficult to do that. So all of these things in the mix, salaries, high inflation levels, people's expectations are significant. All of those things in the mix have created
financial uncertainty. Are people less likely to move a job? Think, well, at least I've got a job.
I think so. I think that makes people
If I lose
nervous.
this job, I'll get some redundancy. If I move,
You've got 2 years. You've got to then build up your service again to 2 years, and it's
so people are just because that does weigh on people, doesn't it? It's like, well, I've been here a long time. I'll be a fool to leave.
Exactly, and I think particularly in light of kind of the Bank of England's news yesterday and the interest rate hike, I think people are feeling nervous.
So employers are probably sitting thinking, oh, it would be much easier if we were in a country like America, because we're recording this on the day that Twitter employees are waiting to hear whether they're going to have jobs or not.
Yeah, exactly.
We're fortunate in one way that we've got a lot of regulation in the UK that actually protects workers. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but we do all right, don't we? We're not bad. So that also means, though, there's a lot of stuff you've got to get right as well as the soft things. There's a lot of hard technical things you've got to get right as well, isn't there? And it's probably worth just going through a couple of the different stages here on how you find someone, how you keep them, how you do that. So if we just say that there's a 3-step process, you've got to find the right person, you've then got to make the right offer and persuade them to accept it. So that includes the interview stage, etc. And then, of course, you've got someone. It's much easier to keep an employee who's working well for you than find a replacement. So we'll talk a bit about the retention as well.
Yeah, great.
So when you're trying to find someone, then, most people just think, well, we'll just put an advert out.
Yeah.
Is that it?
I think there's more to it than that, in terms of you've got to think about where you're going to place that advert and what market you're trying to attract. And the more places you place the advert, the more diverse and range of applicants you will receive, and hopefully you'll receive a higher number of applicants. But it's thinking about the wording of the advert as well. So
you mentioned the more places you put it. I made a throwaway comment about cleaner wanted in the post office. There used to be little personal ads all over the place. I don't know if there still are now, presumably there are. Depending on the role you're recruiting for, that may be the exact place to be or a terrible place to be. If you're looking for someone who's, I don't know, if you're trying to attract a GP to a GP surgery, an ad in the post office is never going to get it. Yeah. So that diversity is good, more places, but the right places. Yeah,
it's got absolutely the right places, but then back to the wording of the advert, you want somebody to be attracted to it, and it's about providing detail about what the role entails, and what salary and benefits are potentials, and making that clear, but also trying to sell, I guess, your firm's culture in there, because you want somebody to see a job advert, or when they're approached maybe by a recruitment agency, you want to have the hard sell on them immediately, don't you, in respect of what a great place it is to work.
I was going to so what you're getting at there then is you've got to make sure that you kind of, the advert fits in with the culture that you're actually offering. It's pointless having come and sit on beanbags, if you're lashing people when they get there. And conversely, it's pointless having a rigid, formal, old school job offer if you're trying to actually be a business that isn't rigid, formal and old school.
Yeah.
It's just got to be your personality.
It's got to feed through to the job.
And again, there's no right or wrong. It's your personality. It's just got to be honest.
Yeah. It's kind of your own brand values and culture, and just making sure it feeds through into how you present in your recruitment process and the job adverts. Yeah.
Where do you sit then, Sarah, on basically pay? We'll just say pay, because LinkedIn and commentaries generally is about, well, you're not putting the pay in, why would anyone apply? But employers sometimes genuinely don't know what the pay is going to be because they don't know who they're going to get, especially smaller employers. I think if you're a big employer and you've got a team of 10 people and you want an 11th, well, the pay is going to be what those 10 are getting.
Yeah.
If you're a smaller firm, you might say, well, we need an internal accountant.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know if you need a bookkeeper 3 days a week or a full-time accountant internally. You might be prepared to take whatever comes, but it's quite hard to find that exact role, isn't it?
Yeah, and somebody might come for an interview who actually doesn't really tick the boxes that you want in respect of experience, but you're prepared to invest in them and recruit them anyway because you can see that
because you'll adapt the offer to say, well, they're the right person.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll adapt,
and therefore you might want to offer them a lower salary, but with the incentive to achieve this level of salary, we will invest in you, you invest in us, and we'll make that work. So it's a really difficult one. I think it does depend upon the size of your organisation and whether you have set salary and bandings and grades. I mean, somewhere like the NHS where they have grading systems.
You look for a grade 6, what grade 6 is.
But I do think it's very business dependent, because what you also don't want to do is put people off applying. And if you have sometimes like high salary levels, you may think, well, that will attract people to us, but it can also be a little bit off-putting because people tend to talk themselves down.
Imposter syndrome. I couldn't go for a 60 grand job. I'm only on 40. I couldn't go for 60, whereas they might have applied for a 45 grand job. You just never know.
You never know. So I think it is very. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it. It's just.
So again, depends on the job. If you can put the salary in, just put the damn salary in. If you can't, you need to give some indication. So join our finance team. We're looking for a bookkeeper, and then you'll get all of them. And you can filter out as you want.
You could always put a salary range in there.
Of course,
that, and then that gives you
depending
that flexibility.
on experience.
And depending on experience. Yeah.
Okay then. So as part of the, so we're still kind of in the find, but also in the kind of the offer and accept kind of stage here then. So let's say we've managed to get an advert out. The right people have seen it, and some of those people have applied. What do we need to do then to make sure that we're getting the right people over the line? What format should an offer look like? What should be in an offer? What are the things you see that people just keep getting wrong?
I think I would just say in terms of getting people to the interview and getting the right people, I think first impressions always make lasting impressions. So I think it's really important to have a smooth recruitment process where you're responsive, you're engaging, and people think from the offset, I'd like to go and work for these guys. In terms of if you get to the interview stage, from a legal perspective, you've got to really be very careful in respect of what you ask people. So you don't want to ask anything discriminatory. Are you planning on having children, for example, soon?
Just be married. You're not having kids soon, are you?
Exactly. Or asking about people's health problems and absence records. Just be very careful about things like that. But ideally, you would be asking all of the applicants the same questions. You would have a couple of people do the interviews. You would have full notes so that the process looks as objective as possible, because unsuccessful job applicants can pursue discrimination claims. So you've just got to be very mindful. If you've asked any questions you shouldn't have asked, they'll say, well, we know why you didn't. And that might not have been relevant. They might have had completely the wrong experience, no qualifications in the role. But if you've asked the question, that is a red flag question. Absolutely. Well, that's why you didn't. And it'll be hard to justify if you haven't got that evidence, won't it? Absolutely. And what I would say is sometimes it's not the obvious questions as well, and this really goes back to the job advert, and this is something I see a lot of, and it is a bit of a bugbear of mine. It's requiring full-time working in job adverts or interviews, because the employment tribunals readily accept that more women than men take on caring responsibilities in this country. It's not just caring for children now, it goes right across the generations, because what's happening is people's kids are leaving home. In my house, the women care
for their husband, to be honest.
I was going to say elderly parents, but okay, we can go with that as well.
I'm hapless, so I fully accept. Exactly. But also there's some great research on this as well. We've talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. A book by Carolina Cordia Perez, I think it is, Invisible Women. Statistically, women do have more caring responsibilities. They've got to do more school drops, dropping shopping off at parents. All of these things make it harder to get those fixed start and end times.
Yeah, exactly.
As before you put the COVID effect in, what, do I have to come in? Why do I have to come in at all? I can do this from anywhere. So
yeah, it's just making sure, because if you put full-time work in, then ultimately you could be saying you're saying to a huge number of women, we won't let you work flexibly, we won't let you work 4 days. And that's not great from a discrimination perspective, but also you could be reducing your talent pool massively. You're eliminating a massive section of society from applying. So I really did want to get that point across, because it still does happen, and ultimately you don't need to say anything. And again, if you have somebody come to you who's a complete superstar, and ideally you'd want them to work 5 days, but they say I'd really like to work 4 days because I've got these care responsibilities, a lot of the time it isn't really actually a big problem.
Again, depends on the organisation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you need someone to be on a desk 5 days a week, then you might not be able to be flexible. If you're that big team with 10 and you're looking for the 11th, well, a 4-day 11th, it doesn't make much difference, does it? So, again, just...
It is organisation.
Because people are sometimes limiting their own pool for a reason that doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
They're getting less people and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But most, when I get into these debates, I often play devil's advocate and say, well, what if the person wants to put in a day's holiday? Or what if you send the person off on a 1-day training course? Do you cope without them? Yes. Well, can you cope without them every week? Probably, yes.
Probably, yeah.
And it's just having that discussion. I've just at least been aware of it as a red flag,
So right, again, so we've got the right person, they've applied, we like them, we've got an outline agreement on the type of thing that they're going to be doing. How do you make sure that the offer you make to them protects both parties? It sets the expectations you're going to get from the new worker, but also sets their expectations right on what you're going to do for them as well. Because there's some things you've got to do legally and some things you should do as best practice, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of best practice, you want them to be very clear as to what the job is going forward, and that really sets your stall out for the rest of the employment. Start from day one. This is what your job description is. This is what we require of you. But also, this is what we'll invest in you. So
this is what you can expect from us.
Yeah, in terms of career development, training, and all of this should be part of the interview process. It should be two-way. Again, it's back to your organisation's culture. What can we do for you, and what can you do for us? In terms of the legal things to put in the offer letter, it's really important to make to summarise the contractual terms. Your obvious things like pay and benefits, but it's really important to make your offer letter conditional upon certain, if you like, things being achieved. So make sure that employment is conditional upon receiving a right to work check, or somebody passing a right to work check, receiving references. Quite a lot of jobs require DBS checks now, because what you don't want to do is if somebody, you get negative references, or somebody fails the right to work check or the DBS check, then ultimately you've already offered them employment, they've accepted, you've got to terminate their employment, you've got to pay them a notice period. Yeah, I
was going to say you've been...
You haven't started employment.
Lost a couple of months' pay from someone who never even started because you've said, I will pay you.
Exactly, so you've got to make their employment conditional upon them achieving...
Satisfying the conditions.
Satisfying the conditions,
I mean, there's 3 interesting points there, and I probably won't remember all of these, but if we can talk loosely then or quickly about what the job description should be, because something I see repeatedly in businesses, it's like, they're not doing... That might probably come into the retention bit and the probation, etc. So, but I think the job description is critical, and we've got issues at the moment with a client where all of the issues would have been resolved had they just given job descriptions at the start. So it's staggering. The second thing you mentioned there is references. I mean, how much relevance should they place on references now? Because, I mean, I always think, well, people aren't going to give you a name to ring up and get a reference from who they're not expecting to get a good reference from.
Yeah.
Is it still as critical as it?
I think so. I think it depends. I mean, you would always want a reference, wouldn't you, from their existing employer? And
It's certainly where they work now.
Yeah, and if they weren't, I think that would be sounding an alarm bell for me if they weren't giving you that name. So I think that's probably the starting point. I mean, there is this myth that you can't give a bad reference. It is a myth.
Well, that's where I was. So the next part of that question was, but also if you're asked to give a reference, you've got to be careful. You can't scupper it so you keep the worker.
Yeah.
You can't lie.
Yeah.
But also there's a lot of people are going to go, oh yeah, no, sorry, we don't give references.
Yeah.
Is that because of that myth?
Yeah.
Is it?
I think you can give a negative reference, but it's got to be truthful and it's got to be an honest reference. And I think that's where employers run into difficulty, because you could say, well, actually they weren't a very good performer, but objectively, how can you prove that unless you've got real evidence? So you've got to be.
Well, this comes back to the next part of the thing, of the retention as well. You shouldn't say anything in a reference that you haven't already said to that worker.
Exactly.
In an appraisal, a catch-up, a review,
yeah.
a probation.
And it's got to be objective. You know, you don't want to say, oh, they haven't got a great attitude, or, you know, they weren't very motivated. It's got to be...
They're a bit grumpy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what does that mean? Because to be fair, some places you need to be grumpy.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll not alienate our viewers, but you know, some places grumpy is a prerequisite. So okay then, so we've made an offer, it's conditional upon the right things. We've covered a couple of the legal things there. You know, I suppose the legal point there is you've got to make sure that you're saying it's conditional, subject to the relevant checks.
Yeah.
You can't make it conditional on things that can't be ascertained, but let's just assume we've got some key things. So we've got someone starting tomorrow. What do we need to do in advance of them starting tomorrow then? What legal requirements are there on day one, and the things we need to do before we make a formal binding offer?
Yeah. So usually by the time employment starts, the offer is at that point already formal and binding.
So conditions
have been satisfied,
which makes it a binding offer.
Yeah. And the law has changed in recent years where you have to now give an employment contract on day one when somebody starts. So you would want to either send them that in advance or at the very latest present that to them on day one.
When they turn up.
When they turn up. The main other thing is your right to work check. You know, you do not as an employer want to be in a position where somebody is working for you and they're illegally working for you. So they're kind of the two main things from the legal.
Just for anyone who's never employed or isn't doing this, what's a right to work check?
So it's checking that somebody just simply has the right to work in the UK, and this has become again more relevant post-Brexit because the freedom of movement ended.
You can't assume because someone's physically here that they're allowed to work. Yeah, they might be on a student visa, they might not have a visa at all. Anything could happen.
Yeah. So you would want. I mean, for the more straightforward cases, you would be checking that they had a British passport, and you would take a photocopy of that and satisfy yourself.
It's funny. You would think most people would want to do those basic things anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to trust this person to come into my workplace and do things on my behalf.
Yeah.
You think some of these things are just common sense.
You would, but not always.
but they're not.
No. And then if somebody didn't have a British passport, it's making sure that they've either got indefinite leave to remain and they can produce the paperwork to that effect, because there may have been a settled worker prior to us exiting Brexit, and you know that they may have been granted that leave to remain, or that they're here under a valid visa. And you then get into a whole host of other issues in terms of, you need to have diary reminders in place to make sure that the visa doesn't expire. So it kind of...
and also you can't offer someone a permanent position if they're on a short-term stay.
Yes, exactly.
Because again, you're just opening yourself up to, issues, aren't you?
Yeah.
So okay, then what has to be in a contract? Is it worth covering that off? Or?
Yeah, I mean...
Because all right, well, I'm not doing that, but what does it need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this comes back down a little bit to the job description, but in terms of an employment contract, you'd have set out the main contractual terms, so you have these things like salary, holiday entitlement, benefits. Those are, I guess, things that benefit the employee, but from a business protection perspective, you would want to ensure that the employment contained clauses such as confidentiality provisions. Think about your GDPR compliance. If you're in a competitive industry, do you want to have restrictive covenants in there which state that if somebody leaves your employment, they can't entice away your clients or your staff? Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean...
You might also have professional regulatory things. So we as accountants, you as solicitors.
Yeah.
If you're handling monies, etc., often your regulator will say, you all have to do this,
Yeah.
so we have to undertake money laundering training,
Yeah.
however often it is. You're going to have to say, well, and you have to maintain your money laundering. There's things that you're going to have to do from a regulatory perspective, isn't it?
Usually it's requiring somebody to comply with the standards of their industry. So you know, for me, example, it would be, you know, being contractually required to comply with the Solicitors Regulation Authority's rules and regulations. And then
if you get struck off, well,
yeah.
you haven't got a job anymore for
exactly,
it. Yeah,
exactly. And then you do now have to set out what training you require people to do. Again, it's another relatively recent change to the law. So in terms of actually what should be legally in an employment contract, I think there's a list of about 15 things that has to be in there that's contained in legislation. But I would say those are the easy parts. The more complex parts are what do you want to put in your employment contract for your business to protect your business.
Because the job you're offering someone is unique.
Yeah.
It may be a stretch, it may be one of 10 or 11, but it's your employer and employee uniqueness that I was getting at there.
Yeah.
No two jobs are the same really in that regard, are they?
Yeah, exactly. And something might occur that's a one-off. Like, for example, somebody might come to you and say, well, I need to complete this training course. And you say, okay, we'll pay for it, but if you leave us within X amount of time, we want to recoup the cost of that training cost back from you. So it's making sure that you're not always just issuing blanket contracts and not actually thinking about, as you say, the unique individual circumstances and how you might need to tweak a contract.
So there's, say, 15 or so things, they're the basics. Other things that you, and I kind of know the answer, but there are also things you can't exclude because they're provided by statute.
Yeah, of course.
You can't say you will not get any sick pay, you cannot have holidays.
Yeah, exactly.
Are they the obvious ones, or are there other things that you're not allowed to exclude?
Not really, it's just you in general you can't contract out of any employment law rights which are contained in legislation, so that's kind of the general principle.
So if that's in there, it's like, well that's not enforceable.
Yeah.
Does that then throw the whole thing out, or does it just mean...
It would...
I know in tenancy law, if you haven't done your gas check, you can't evict someone, for instance. But in employment law, if you say, well, you can't have any bank holidays off and we're not going to give you the time, well, you can't do that because there's minimum holiday requirements by statute, isn't there?
Yeah.
How does that... Does that mean the whole thing's invalidated? Or?
No, it wouldn't mean that, but it's probably not something that ever really occurs in principle, really. It's been a long time.
I'm just thinking there might be people watching this going, I better start doing employment contracts who've never done them, even though it's been law for a while now.
Yeah, I would say don't do your own.
Well, devil's advocate, you would say that, wouldn't you? But no, joking aside, you're taking on an employee is a big spend. Yeah. You wouldn't buy a house without getting a survey and doing your checks, the legal checks to make sure it's legally able to be sold, etc. You wouldn't buy a car without making sure the person you're buying it off can do. But yet, staggeringly, people will write their own employment contracts.
And actually,
employees... For something that they're buying a 20, 30, 100 grand employee, and they've handwritten their own agreement. It's baffling, isn't it?
Completely, and employees can actually bring claims if they aren't given an employment contract which complies with the legislation, so it's really important to get the contracts right. But also the policies and procedures and the job descriptions that sit alongside it, because your employment contract's only one part of the tale. Well,
that's the next part. So what else is good practice? What else do you have to do, and what else is good practice on day one? So I know we have an induction, everyone sits with our MD, says what kind of business we are, the culture we have, how we want people to behave, what they can expect from us. What are people getting wrong in that area? Because the retention is quite important, and it starts as soon as they turn up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like legally what you need, I mean, the main thing is just making sure that you've got in place the appropriate policies. So, equal opportunities policies, grievance and disciplinary. Those are all kind of the very technical sort of legal policies that you need. But then you also want to just make sure that operationally, you're telling staff what they need to know. And induction processes are, of course, important, but it's always about getting that balance with telling people so much information.
Too much, yeah.
That at the end of the first week of the new job, they're thinking, what on earth have I done? And it's kind of making sure, you're presenting the right impression and culture and not overloading people with too much information, but at the same time giving them what they need to know. It's not an easy balance to achieve at all. I mean, I think the main thing for me is just making sure that once people have been through their induction, they're not then just left, because you don't... Anybody who fails the probationary period, it's a failure on the part of the employee and the employer, isn't it?
There's two two people involved in that, isn't
exactly.
it?
And from the employee's perspective, it might not be an intentional failure or anything that they've done wrong, but they've spent a huge amount of time and money investing in somebody, and at the end of the probationary period, it's all been for nothing. So it's really important to just manage employees and make sure that
it's a big spend.
It's a big
Employing
spend.
someone is a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're back to square one.
You've got to go through the whole thing again.
Exactly.
And it wasn't fun the last time. Why would you volunteer to do it again?
Exactly. So it's about not just saying there's your induction and we'll see you in 6 months when your probationary period's coming. It's about that good management. It's
there should be no surprises at a 6-month probation or a 3-month. There shouldn't be any surprise, should there? Week 1 you should go, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Week 2 is like, ooh, I noticed you didn't do this. And they should have a chance to go, I thought you were going to be doing this. There should be no surprises.
Yeah, and having the open discussion, how are you getting on? You know, is there anything that you're struggling with that you need a bit more support with? And you know, because it is so daunting starting a new job, and it's that two-way process. You know, I've noticed you haven't done this, but actually, what do you need us to help you with?
Because that's a learning opportunity as well, isn't it? Oh, you didn't do that. Oh, it didn't say anywhere I needed to do it. Nobody's told me. Oh, good point.
Yeah.
You'll get that changed, but can you start doing it?
Exactly.
There you go. I mean, that's a good thing, isn't it?
Of course it is, and again,
you can't do that 6 months down the line. It's too late, isn't it?
And again, it's that information overload, being realistic about what you expect people to achieve when they start a new job, and just checking in with them regularly. And you know, it's back to the job description, and this is what we require of you, and this is what we've set out what we want you to do, and just kind of keeping it all under review, really.
One of the key things that I keep seeing, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this or your feedback, because you see this all the time, because you help people recruit, but also deal with the issues that arise when people aren't performing or employers haven't performed. How important is a good job description? Like, I know you've got the legal stuff. Everyone has to get them right. That's not optional. But the job description, it just feels like that's the bit where people just get it wrong so many times. Yeah,
and again, it is very kind of business dependent, because if you have a small business and everybody kind of just mucks in on a day-to-day basis, then that probably job descriptions are a bit over the top. But if you've got a reasonably large business or a medium-sized business, then it's always helpful for both the employee and the employer to set out clearly what the job expectations are, because...
So can I just touch on that? Yeah, because the small workplace, ironically, I think the feedback is almost instant. If you're one of 3 or 4 people in a team, including the business owner, you know what's going on, and you don't wait till the 6-month probation. So I actually think, I agree with you, the job description is more important in a bigger organisation, because other than on day 1 where you shake someone's hand, you might not see them again for weeks or months. You might not have any interaction because you don't need to on an operational basis. So I actually think you're probably right on that. It's more important there, but also that's where I think people just aren't doing it.
Yeah.
We've got people who've recruited directors, they've made people directors, and they haven't given them any guidance as to what their new responsibilities are.
Yeah.
Or people are made a manager. It's like, you've never told them what the difference in their job is.
And the first thing that person's going to say when they say you're not performing is, I didn't know, I didn't realise. But again, if you set out the job expectations, I mean, the other side of it, again, always wanting to be objective and look at both sides, is you don't also want your job descriptions to be overly prescriptive, so that when you start asking people to do things, they go, well, that's not in my job description. So it's always about that balance and making sure that the wording is not overly prescriptive, but that you, at the very least, set out the minimum that you require of people with some flexibility added in there.
So I mean, we had an example in one of our clients where someone was being a director of a service line, and they were never told that they would then be responsible for managing the performance of the people under them. It was a very hands-on MD who basically interfered, for want of a better word, in everything. They were like, oh, well, you never told them. It's a reasonable expectation that they would be doing it to the outside world, but actually it was also a justifiable thing. Well, you never told me I had to do that, so obviously I didn't do it. All that's changed is you paid me a bit more money and I now get the blame for stuff. It's like, well, you know, so I think it's a two-way thing, isn't it? You've got to
But that's about just management in terms of you should be checking in with your staff regularly. So that MD should have been having one-to-ones with the director and saying like, how's this going, how's that going, I've noticed this, or how
are you finding the check-ins with the team? I haven't done any.
Yeah.
Well, again, that would be flushed out within a week, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That would come out quite quick.
Quite quickly. So it's just making sure you don't have that hands-off approach to management.
What is the biggest cause then, do you think, for people leaving an employment, do you reckon, Sarah? Because there's a thing going around, people don't leave employers, they leave managers. Yeah. Is just, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, because there's also something going around in terms of most people don't actually leave a job for salary in terms of a pay increase. Of course, some people do, but most of the time it's because they're just uncomfortable with where they're working, and it might be the managers or it might be the culture of the organisation. What I would say is just because somebody's really good at their job, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at managing people. And what I often, if I have a client who contacts me who says somebody isn't managing well, usually the first question I say is, but have you trained them to manage? Because
have you upskilled them into their new role?
Yeah. So for example, if somebody's a really good solicitor or accountant and then they're appointed to manage a team, they might be a brilliant solicitor and accountant, but do they then have the softer skills to manage and lead that team? But again, if you haven't set that out to them, this is what we require, and you haven't offered any support to that manager, you're on the back foot. So so you're right, in terms of, I think people do often leave jobs because of managers, but there is an obligation on employers to make sure that they support and train the managers. And again, I think in terms of people leaving jobs, it is about your organisation's culture, and I think, it is more than just pay and benefits. I think people want to have a voice, so whether that's involvement with things like corporate social responsibility, or you've kind of got staff engagement committees. Environmental sustainability is a hot topic. It's kind of just having employees kind of having a cause and a passion maybe that's outside of their job. Yeah. And obviously if they get on with the manager and they're very well paid, then you should be home and dry.
That's the holy trinity, isn't it? Yeah. Because I always think people are only looking at other job adverts and only saying what they could get paid if they're unhappy in the first place.
Yeah, and it's
If you absolutely love your job and you're over the moon and you're absolutely, and everything about your job is sweet, for want of a simple way of putting it, you're just saying no to recruiters, aren't you, when they inevitably pitch at you, and you're not. Used to be reading the journal, the Chronicle on Thursday or whatever it was Jobs Day. You're not buying it and you're not looking for jobs if you're completely happy. So if you can get the right role and make sure people are getting enough to do what they want, then salary isn't the critical thing, is it?
No, not
because also
always.
People won't just, I'm sure there's loads of jobs where, how much would I have to give you to do this? You go, all the money in the world wouldn't get me to do that. Well, that happens with work as well, doesn't it?
Of course
it's like, there's just some jobs I couldn't do, which is proof that pay isn't the critical element, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's back to the culture of your organisation. Is this somewhere I can see myself working for the next 20 years? Is my manager somebody who I can see myself working with the next 20 years? And all of these things massively come into the mix. Yeah.
What just, if you can leave us then, Sarah, with one thing that you just think everyone's getting wrong, what's the one takeaway tip if we had to say, if everyone just did this, that would make life so much easier?
Wow, that's a hard question. I think I would probably focus on the retention, and I guess I'm basing this on a lot of what I see is that if you want to retain your staff, just engage with them and make sure that your managers are well trained to be managers, because I think the retention part is probably just as hard as the recruitment part at the minute, and the recruitment part is quite difficult to solve. The retention part doesn't have to be as difficult.
Because also you only have to find people if you lose people.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you keep your good staff, you won't have as much you won't have as many recruitment issues. Yeah. And again, it's just making sure that you're training your managers and upskilling just across the workforce to engage with the staff, to have employee engagement initiatives to keep everyone happy.
Just have a happy workforce.
A happy workforce.
Nice and
easy,
simple.
it just sounds really easy, doesn't it, when I say it like that?
Simple as that, happy workforce. Well, listen, Sarah, thanks very much.
No problem.
I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you've all learned something. And As always, we appreciate any comments, any feedback. Sarah's details are in the links below. Feel free to reach out. I'm sure she'll be happy to expand on any points she's made.
Okay, thank you.